Before we move into today's episode, I want to express my sincere gratitude as I wrap up Season 2. This podcast show has come a long way since I first started it in January of 2023. All thanks to you all, the audience, this podcast grew from an average of 30 listens a month to 30 listens a week, and further to 100 plus listens a week. This is the last episode of Season 2, as I take a little winter break. If you're interested in what you can look forward to with Season 3, listen through to the end of this episode. Welcome to Aging Together, a podcast dedicated to exploring the challenges and opportunities of caring for our aging communities. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, an occupational therapist with specialty certifications in geriatric care, dementia, and fall prevention. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields or can share their experiences with caregiving. Together with the guest speakers, we dive into a wide range of topics including health and wellness, care planning, caregiving, and more. I hope you'll join me on this journey. Let's navigate aging together. Hi everyone, I'm your host Pooja, and you're listening to Aging Together. For this last episode of Season 2, we're diving into dementia coaching versus skilled therapy. To review this topic, I have the privilege of interviewing Lizette Cloete. Lizette is a seasoned occupational therapist and the daughter of two parents with cognitive loss. With over 30 years of experience as an occupational therapist turned dementia coach and 5 years of being a daughter of dementia, she has helped thousands of families navigate a dementia care journey from diagnosis to death. Her personal experience as a family caregiver to her parents opened her eyes to the complexities related to caregiving, including the balancing act between her own health, her own resources, and her own relationships while caregiving, not to mention navigating the healthcare system with and for her parents. This journey prompted her to develop a unique process to dementia caregiving. From a faith-based perspective, she uses science-backed solutions to dementia caregiving based in her education and training as an occupational therapist with specialty certifications in dementia care. Lizette is on a mission to help Christian spouses and adult children of people with dementia navigate their journey by decreasing caregiver stress. Using biblical principles, evidence-based solutions to dementia caregiving, and addressing caregiver stress through weekly tracking, Think Different Dementia shows caregivers how and where to decrease their stress and reduce their risk for burnout and redeem your time. We believe that dementia coaching is the most effective way to help caregivers decrease their stress by anticipating and managing the inevitable dementia-related changes. We know that time is the one resource that cannot be regained, and we help families redeem their time. As a pastor's wife, Lizette is uniquely qualified to answer dementia caregiving challenges from a biblical perspective. Lizette graduated as an occupational therapist from the University of Pretoria in South Africa in 1992. She and her daughter emigrated to the U.S. in 1993 and currently reside in South Carolina. They have 2 daughters and 1 son-in-law, 2 cats, 1 dog, and many chickens. Together, we're discussing the difference between dementia coaching and skilled therapy, as well as how to know which professional is the right fit for you and your family. Please join me in welcoming Lizette to the show. Hi, Lizette. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me. This is a special treat today, having an interview with a fellow OT.
Yes, it's always nice to have other OT practitioners on the show because we can talk for hours and hours and hours on random topics, right?
Absolutely. And it will go around in places people never thought they would go.
It's true. It's true. I provided a brief intro bio about you, but I'd like for you to share your journey as an occupational therapist and how it led you to your dementia consulting practice today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, that can be a very long or a very short conversation since I've been an occupational therapist for 31 years. But I would say my journey to the dementia caregiving consultancy actually started when I was a student in South Africa. It's the patient that I say still haunts me today. I was working in the geriatric psychiatric hospital in Pretoria called Weskoppies, which literally means the Western Hills, but it had another not so nice name. It was, the psych hospital, so you can just imagine, right? And I'll never forget this particular patient. She's got to be long passed away now. She was elderly. It was the geri psych unit, and she was walking up and down the halls saying all the time, "I'm tired. I'm so very, very tired." And she would stop right in front of you and just stare at you, and then she'd turn around and walk down the hall and come back and say, "I'm tired. I'm so very, very tired." And many, many years later, I recognized my inability to help her at that time was because, number one, I didn't have the skills. And number two, she had dementia, but I didn't necessarily put it together. And so as we immigrated to the United States, my husband and I, and you're going to find this very amusing, my very, very, very first job, I was petrified of a total hip replacement, right? We had learned, which is why you're laughing, because they're the easiest thing to work with now. But I was so scared because we had been told, you're going to pop their hip out. You're going to pop their hip out if you don't follow the precautions. So when I started my work as a therapist, I was so focused on those types of patients because, it's overwhelming when you come out of school. You come from another country. You've got to figure out the whole system on this side, all of that kind of stuff. But then I started to pay attention a little bit more to what was going on around me. And my first work in the United States was in skilled nursing facilities in the 90s, early 1990s. So it was vastly different than it is now. But then I started to recognize or notice that I always believed patients stayed in a nursing facility because they physically couldn't take care of themselves. And then I started to recognize, it wasn't necessarily because they physically couldn't take care of themselves. Oftentimes they couldn't go home because they cognitively couldn't take care of themselves. And that sent me down a journey of actually learning more about cognition, what it is, how it works, all of those kinds of things. And, by virtue of interest and time and stuff like that, it started out with strokes and head injuries and that kind of population early on in my career. But then later on in my career, I noticed that I really gravitated towards the people with dementia. And then, one day you just wipe your eyes out and you look back and it's like, I'm actually specialized in it, never set out to become specialized in it, but intuitively just enjoy working with the population and their family caregivers. So that's kind of how I got to the specializing in dementia part of it, but it was by a very, very long 31-year journey.
It's funny that you say that about hip replacements because I feel the same way. I feel like anything orthopedic that's me. Like I'm always scared to ruin something that's just been operated on or pull someone's joint apart or break precautions. And now you've got a whole messy situation, right?
For sure.
And I think that fear is still there. I'm guilty of it. I've definitely told students hey, you have to be careful with the precautions. You don't want to pop their hip out,
And granted, to be fair, total hip replacements are vastly different 31 years ago than what they are now. I mean, when I came through occupational therapy school in the 1990s, I graduated in 92. People who had their hip replaced were bedridden for 7 days. They would not let them get out of bed for 7 days. So it's very different. Now you have your hip replaced and, if you have it replaced at 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, your anatomy is out of bed.
Yeah. I know we're deviating a little bit, but it's the same thing with total knee replacements, right? My dad just had one of his knees replaced a few months ago, but my grandma had hers done 25 years ago, right? And so she's like, "You're walking already? You're home already?" Because, he was the next morning discharge because his surgery was later. But still, we do same day discharges on total knees now. And she's like, I was in the hospital for a week and then I had to go to rehab. And I'm like, yeah, it's all different now. He's coming home.
Yep. But yeah, I think it's a valid conversation to say how much it's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so your journey through occupational therapy and specializing into dementia, you kind of started really specializing in on dementia therapy, but then you kind of pivoted into dementia coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain the key differences between dementia coaching versus dementia therapy? And then what are some of those common misconceptions about coaching versus therapy when it comes to dementia care?
That's a really good question, because dementia coaching and dementia therapy or skilled therapy are two vastly different things. They're both very, very necessary, but they are entirely different models. Dementia coaching is something that is extremely new. Very few people actually know about coaching or dementia coaching. A lot more people understand the whole skilled therapy side. But let me start with the skilled therapy side, since we're both therapists. I love therapists. I think they're great humans. I, am one, probably will always mostly think like one. But when you are a family who is struggling with somebody living with dementia, think about where the touch points are that you're going to come into contact with skilled therapy. Mom fell, she's in the hospital, she has an underlying history of dementia, and now she's having changes. Mom's admitted to the hospital with the urinary tract infection and changes. Mom can't go home, so now mom's going to a skilled nursing facility or a rehab because of those kinds of changes. Or mom is going home with home health. All of those places, or outpatient, are where you get the touch points with the therapists. But the reality of the matter is, therapists all are unique individuals, and all of them have their unique specialties, right? So you might come into an acute care hospital where you are going to likely get a general therapist, not a dementia specialist. So they know a little bit about a lot of different things, but they don't know a lot about one specific thing. Or if they do, it might be a total shoulder, or it might be, the back, or whatever that person's interest level is. So when you're a patient coming in to whatever setting you're going into, you're at the mercy of whoever's employed there, whoever's the therapist that is assigned to your case. And sometimes you might be blessed to have somebody with dementia and to end up with a specialist, but it's more likely going to be accidental. So skilled therapy is wonderful and good, and there are more and more therapists who are specializing in dementia and dementia caregiving. I know you had Rachel Wiley on a while back. Rachel is also a dementia specialist, but Rachel is geographically bound, which means that she's not going to be able to impact as many people's lives, and then probably has a really long waiting list to get in to see her in her geographic area. So therapists are good if you can find them in your geographic region. Therapists are also mandated to treat the patient and not the caregiver. And so we all know, for the most part, what is typically said about dementia. It's overwhelming. I'm so stressed. I don't know what to do. It keeps changing, right? But when you're in the medical model, your role as an OT is to treat that person. The caregiver is coincidental, and the caregiver is coincidental only to the effect that it's pertaining to that specific situation. And quite rightfully so. I mean, that's what insurance is there for. The insurance is for me. If I'm the one with dementia, then you need to be focused on me. But caregivers burn out, and caregivers cannot do it alone. And so that's where the coaching component comes in. That's where the dementia coaching side of it comes in, where you can really focus on the caregiver. So everything that I do is I only work with the caregiver. I never see a person with dementia anymore. Everything is informed by my occupational therapy background. I mean, you cannot take it out of me, but I don't do assessments on patients. I don't do assessments on, the stuff that's the skilled stuff. I actually do assessments on the caregiver. I do assessments on, figuring out where the person living with dementia is. And then everything that I do is focused on how to keep that caregiver, that care partner, healthy throughout the journey and focusing on after caregiving.
I think that's really helpful to know and really delineate the fact or the key difference of working with the patient versus working with the family, right? I do something similar where I work with the family. I don't assess the person. I don't assess the mom or the dad. I strictly work with the caregivers, right? Or the family care team. And I think that's a really key distinction to make because it's really easy. It's not really easy. I'd say it's actually really hard for us to work within that mindset, right? And because a big part of, I don't know about you, but a big part of me, I'm like, oh, I really want to help the patient. Like, I really want to see what the patient's doing so I can help the caregivers like more effectively, right? But then I'm like, no, they need their own therapist. Like the patient needs a specific therapist to do a full assessment, and then we can guide care planning appropriately as needed, right? And so I don't know if you feel like that sometimes where you're like towing on that fine line of like, okay, I can't intervene here. Like I need someone else to take care of this because it draws that line between the therapist versus the coach, right?
Right. And I haven't struggled with that as much. And I think there's possibly two reasons for that. The first one is because most of what I do is virtual, I never see the person. I don't see the person that has dementia. I'm not interacting with them. So it makes it easier for me to keep a line of separation and not go into the skilled therapy mode. And the second reason is because I'm a family caregiver. Like I'm a family caregiver of two parents who have cognitive loss. And recognizing once I started that particular journey for myself, how different it truly is being on the caregiver side and not just, the skilled therapist side. Everything that I read about or think about or focus on now is caregiver focused. I'm not learning skills to take care of the patient anymore. So all of my education, all of the things that I read, like the presentations I put together is all caregiver focused. So it kind of gave me an ability to take a step back. And I think the last reason is I'm old. I'm tired of working with patients. I know that's a little funny, but I've been a therapist for 31 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, I bet. I want to know if you've heard or encountered any common misconceptions between the coach versus therapist and kind of maybe how you've addressed it.
I haven't really run into a lot of common misconceptions, mostly because I don't think a lot of people understand or even know that there is such a thing as a dementia coach or what it entails. I'm not the only dementia coach out there. I'm not the only one calling myself a dementia coach. There are lots of other people who are starting to call themselves coaches. I don't know if you have heard of like a death doula, right? It's the same concept as like a midwife type of thing, but there are people who call themselves dementia doulas, all of those kinds of frameworks. There are people who are taking caregiving certifications to be a caregiver coach, those kinds of things. But because when I'm interacting with people, it's very much in a one-on-one situation or a very small group situation, most of the education comes in that setting. Probably the biggest misconception I have had is we have let me see if I can parse my words. We have a local dementia clinic, and the social worker there does not like me at all because I think she feels like I'm taking over her role. Well, she's serving the people that are going there. I'm trying to serve the people who don't have access to a lot of those kinds of services. So I would say that's probably the biggest misconception I've run into is that a lot of healthcare professionals don't see the difference or do not understand the difference. the way to counteract that is just continued education, continuing to, like, wherever I have an opportunity to speak about coaching, dementia coaching, that's the topic that I choose. So if I go in November, I'll be going to Indiana and doing a caregiver conference, and the topic is dementia coaching. And so just continuing to spread the word, podcasts like this, so that people can start to understand there are other options available for caregivers.
You mentioned a lot of different professionals or even general public taking certification courses to become industry adjacent coaches, right? Whether it's caregiving specific or dementia specific or whatever it might be. What qualifications should someone look for in a dementia coach? Because when there's so many options, it's really difficult for a family caregiver, one, to know what to look for, right? But then two, to understand, is this the right person for our family? Do they have the right training or the education or the information to support us to the best of our abilities? And so in your eyes, what makes someone qualified to be a dementia coach, and what qualifications should a family caregiver be looking for?
I think there are a couple of things that one needs to keep in mind. There are other people out in the care economy doing similar things. For example, TIPA, TIPA Snow. Everybody's heard of TIPA. I love TIPA. Great occupational therapist, met her individually myself. She has a dementia caregiving training, certification training. If you are looking for somebody who is going to be a coach or a certified coach, you need to find people that have taken training by people who are truly educated and able to train you in dementia caregiving. So just basic education. And I'm not talking about somebody who is like you or I, who's an occupational therapist like Rachel. Rachel has, TIPA is an OT. I'm an OT. You're an OT. Rachel's an OT. We all carry our certifications that are in addition to our background as occupational therapists. I'm certified. I'm a certified dementia practitioner. I've taken multiple different certifications. And so that's one way to do it. But if it's a person who doesn't have that academic background like we do, then at the very least, they need to have been through a reputable dementia caregiving program. Judy Cornish has one. She does the Dawn protocol. Protocol's the wrong word, but Dawn is hers. TIPA has one. There are numerous of those types of training programs that one can certainly use to help to pull together at least that this person has the academic or the qualifications, right? So qualifications are a part of it. What makes me a little unique and different is I've developed my own framework related to caregiving from a caregiver perspective, not from a how to take care of the person with dementia. That's a part of it, right? That's skills to care or my OT background, being able to draw on those kinds of things. But I've put together through a lot of learning and things that I've been doing and learning since leaving working with patients, how to pull out the strengths of the caregiver, how to be able to use those caregiver-focused approaches so that they can do this for the marathon. So you have academic and education. You can look at, has the person taken the time or had the interest or the abilities to pull together their own framework, somebody like Judy Cornish, or do you just have a good fit with that person? There's Natalie Edmonds has Care Blazers. She has a much larger group, a much larger audience. She is a gerontologist that does caregiver education and coaching, but it's not as much on a one-on-one basis, right? So you can do one-on-one, you can do small groups, you can do large groups, you can do online courses. So there are a lot of different ways that people can get this information, And then, one of the things that I've started to set myself apart with, and, that's not the intent of this specific podcast, but I'm coming at it from a Christian worldview too. So I've taken the OT side, my Christian worldview side, and the caregiver side and put it together in my own framework. And then ultimately, it is going to be, how do you, as a person coming into this, connect with the person that you're working with? Because you develop a very, very different and a very deep relationship with the person that you are coaching and mentoring. And you actually get into a lot of their life, and not from a physical how to do the care part of it, but how to think through being a caregiver, how to think through the struggles you have. And so it's very much going to depend on, as a coach, ability to connect with the person that you're working with. And if you don't have that connection, then you shouldn't go into a coaching relationship with that particular coach. Then you need to find somebody that you do have a relationship with, or that you can create one with.
You mentioned a lot of things where the family really needs to identify whether they need a coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you provide examples of situations where a family might benefit from more of a coaching model versus skilled therapy?
I think that's really a very good question. And I will tell you, it has taken me an extremely long time. Maybe I'm a little slow on the uptake, but it has been fascinating to me, my own journey in learning who truly is appropriate for the program that I'm putting together. And it's only been recently, it's been within the last month or so, that I've actually been able to articulate that there really are three separate types of people that benefit from dementia coaching. And they're all a little bit different, because at the beginning, people would always say, well, who can you help? Well, I can help any family caregiver with helping somebody living with dementia. And that is true. I can. And that is true. You can as well, because we have the skill set. We've done this for however many years between the two of us. We've done this for a very long time. We can help every single person. But when you're trying to educate people related to coaching, it looks a little bit different. So there's actually three very different types of people. The first one that benefits from coaching, dementia coaching, is somebody that I've started to call a care director or a care manager, like a family care director, family care manager. Now, who are those people? Those people are frequently spouses or adult children who are not the primary caregiver. Okay, so for example, I'll have no relationship with them at all, but it's a good example. Bruce Willis, right? His wife, they have the assets to provide 24-hour caregiver assistance in the house. So her role is more managing all of his care, being able to know how to plan for it, how to pull the caregivers in, how to communicate with him, how to teach the caregivers how to communicate with him. That person benefits from coaching, because they're like the helicopter, the umbrella over, looking at all of these pieces, but they're not the hands-on in the trenches 24-hour caregiver. They're with that person maybe 24 hours a day, but they're not necessarily the one giving them the shower or doing the physical hands-on care. They have the ability to do it. So the adult child might be somebody who mom is in the assisted living or in the memory care, or mom is in an independent living and we anticipate they may need to get to a memory care. So that person can oftentimes benefit from coaching to know how to facilitate that care, but they're not actually providing the physical hands-on care. So that's one type of person who benefits from coaching. The second one is what I've started to recognize are the adult children who are not the primary caregiver yet. They're the proactive family. They're like, oh, mom has dementia. We need to plan for it. We need to figure out what we're going to do. Well, we have kids in the house, or we want to be able to travel, or whatever the situation is. And they're the ones that want to avoid the crisis. They want to be proactive in their journey, and they benefit from coaching to put together that plan, to come up with, I call it the if this happens, then that, right? So if this happens, this is the plan. If that happens, this is the plan. Figuring out and putting together and prognosticating based off of where mom is, what the situation is, the whole picture, finances, preferences, everything, and coming up with a plan that they can then implement on their own. And so it's a little shorter of a coaching container type thing, but that person is not typically living with them. They're aware there's a problem and it's coming down the line, but they're not quite there yet. The third one, which is the group I'm primarily working with, and that's really taken me a long time to be able to figure out exactly who this person is, they're the 24-hour in the trenches full-time caregivers that are contending with and dealing with the day-to-day problems, the day-to-day situations that come up. Some of it are the challenging behaviors. Some of it is just how to communicate with that person. For example, one of my clients at the beginning of our coaching, every single time her mom has mild dementia or had mild dementia at that stage, she could still reason. At the beginning stages, people still have the ability to reason. And she would come in, she's like, but I'm working through reasoning with my mom, the consequences of. And I kept telling her, I'm like, we need to learn how to do it in a different way. We need to learn how to do it. And she's like, but my mom can still reason. And I'm like, I'm not teaching your mom. I'm teaching you, because I know 2 months, 3 months, 6 months from now, that ability is gone. And now you've taught yourself a habit of trying to reason through this process with your mom. So we work on those kinds of skills. So they're the 24-hour in the trenches caregiver who is living, they're typically the spouse or the adult child. Sometimes they're the adult child who both mom and dad have moved in, because they need help, but the spouse is not involved. The spouse is the caregiver, but this is the other caregiver. And those are the people that I'm finding truly, truly benefit from this process, because it's longitudinal over time, which means, I work with people for a year at a time. I don't work with people just, 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. I work with them a year at a time. And so by the time we get to the end of that year, I've actually taught them to speak dementia, and in essence work my way out of a job because they're able to then, they've internalized it. They know how to talk to the person. They know how to communicate with the person. And so a lot of those constant flare-ups and fires and things that we put out at the beginning because it's so overwhelming go away once they actually know what they need to do. There are 3 different types of people that really benefit from it. And each of those containers look a little different.
I think you just outlined your 3 target audiences, right?
Absolutely. I will tell you, and it has been eye-opening.
Yeah. And, out of the buckets that you put together very nicely, that second bucket is where I'm at, right? I'm really working with those adult children of the family members who are removed from the day-to-day of hands-on, but they're proactively trying to plan ahead for a future situation. Let's say, okay, so I come to you as an adult child and I tell you, hey, my mom has XYZ, I need help. Walk me through what a typical coaching session might look like. What can families expect? And then what resources or tools do you generally provide to families during these coaching sessions?
So I have 3 separate ways of working with people. I work with those care director people one-on-one. And so walking through that looks very different than the other one. So we'll start with that specific person. I have started using a tool called the Colby Index. Mm-hmm. I mentioned it to you the last time. I'm not Colby certified yet, but I'm planning on becoming Colby certified in December. The Colby Index comes out of the more like business
psychology.
Yeah, it's a industrial psychology tool type of thing. We can test people's thinking processes, IQ, things like that. We can test people's personality values and things like that. The Colby is the in-between one, the cognitive, the how we do things, how we strive, how we actually take action on things that if we're free to be ourselves, how we would do something. And I have all of my clients now take the Colby Index when I start working with them, because what I've started to recognize just off of doing it with myself is it is the things that frustrate me in being a caregiver is 100% related to my own Colby Index. And so I had a situation recently with one of my one-on-one clients where I had her do the Colby Index. Her husband has mild dementia. She's a younger spouse, and there's a 16-year-old child in the house, and they wanted to do something. Mom wanted to do something with the daughter in November, and her MO, which is how the Colby is described on your mode of operandi, is very similar to mine. And when she went to her husband, she came to him with all of the hundreds of solutions to be able to meet everybody's needs. And after a few minutes of talking with him and going through all of these different solutions, he just shut down and said no, they weren't going to do it. And before I had started doing the Colby, I would not have recognized that as intuitive for her in how she problem solves. And so when she came up with that, I kind of started to smile, and I said to her, I said, I'm exactly the same way, because that's how my brain processes information too. But with him, that's not going to help. She needs to work on finding or identifying somebody that she can do all that brainstorming with first, come up with the two options, and then give him only two choices so that he doesn't get overwhelmed. So that's with with one-on-one people, I'm having them do the Colby Index. On the people where we do the planning, I walk them through a very specific process. Many, many, many years ago, I took a certification called Life Care Planning. Let it lapse forever and ever ago. But it comes out of the medical legal space related to being able to prognosticate and then put together an entire plan for a person with a catastrophic injury. And so I've used those skills to be able to put together a way to plan. And so those people get an individual, we work through everything and come up with a very, very specific plan for them. Then the people in the bigger community, where part of the reason for doing it in a community is so that the caregiver doesn't feel isolated, doesn't feel alone, because that's one of the biggest things that you'll hear caregivers say. I'm so alone. I have no support around me. I can't do it by myself. I'm overwhelmed. That is in a group container where they come into, everybody who joins gets an individual session at the beginning where I get to really know them. I use the caregiver burden inventory, which is a tool for caregiver stress, to be able to take that specific person, because each person's stress is in a different bucket, right? And so we figure out where their stress is, and then we start to build the support around that. And then when they come into the coaching sessions, they come to me with a particular problem at that time, whatever is happening at home. And then we coach through that specific situation. I'll use this as an example. There's a gentleman in my coaching program. His wife has frontotemporal dementia, and she has primary progressive aphasia, and she is at the later stages of her dementia journey. When we first started working together, she was having a lot of pacing and walking through the house, and he'd come up with a lot of good solutions and strategies on his own. deadbolts on the inside of the door, but she literally was breaking the doorknobs, the handles of the door, trying to open the door. So we would coach through some strategies and things that he could try. And he would come back and says, I tried this and it didn't work, or, it did. And then using, occupational therapy and skills to care background, I suggested to him to get a shower curtain with a bookshelf on and tape it to the door. And he did that and came back and said, oh, that stopped most of that specific behavior, right? So coming up with the strategies and ideas. Now she's progressed further and she has bruxism, which is grinding, teeth grinding. And it is very common, something I actually did not realize or recognize, can always learn something more, right? Bruxism is extremely common in frontotemporal dementia. I did not know that because most of the time, you and I would have been long out because she's already on hospice, right? So we were not working with that part of the journey necessarily as therapists. And now I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? In that group setting, all of the community members are trying to come up with ideas for him. We found jewelry, right? That's chewable jewelry. Didn't know about it, And then other types of strategies. And now she'll put something in her mouth and take it out. We can't do candy. We can't do all of these different things. And so finally, between all of us, everybody in the group is helping try to problem solve this. He's figured out through feedback and people helping that a noisemaker, 2 fans, because we're not going to be able to stop her grinding her teeth. Now we got to figure out how to make him cope. And so he has 2 fans running. So now his next piece of homework is to get a noisemaker, like a white noise maker, and try different settings to see which one masks the noise, because we cannot stop her behavior. So in my community, people have access to courses on dementia. They have access to me. They have the community component. And then I'm building out the resources as I run into resources. I'm curating it and putting it in a very specific spot for people.
As you're working one-on-one with these individuals and these families, what are some of, I don't want to say red flags, but kind of the pointers for you as a therapist who coaches, right, that indicates that a family might need more of that professional skilled therapy?
Oh, that one is very easy. If somebody's fallen, I just listen for the skilled components that I know is necessary. I have a gentleman that I'm actually working with right now with his wife. And it's been a very interesting situation because she joined my program even though she doesn't have a definitive diagnosis of dementia for him. And in conversations, he definitely has something going on. So she joined the community. We talked about that she doesn't have a definitive diagnosis. And then in coaching her and working with her, I started to recognize that she hasn't done the medical stuff first, right? She hasn't really pursued trying to get a diagnosis and things like that. And so I'm like, okay, we need to take him to the doctor. Lots of behaviors going on at home that are sounding really random and weird. And I'm like, what's going on? Lots of focus on the bathroom, lots of, bizarre behaviors, quote unquote, but we don't have a diagnosis. And I'm like, we need to get a diagnosis. You need to take him to the doctor. So she took him to the doctor. The doctor ordered a CAT scan. The CAT scan comes back, he has a brain tumor, right? Mm-hmm. So immediately with all of that, I'm like, we need to get home health involved. You need to get nursing. You need to get, he wasn't taking his medication. So I'm like trying to facilitate from my side home health or outpatient or following the medical side of it to try to see how we can get him the help that he needs medically, but also then put the support around her by getting those skilled therapists in the house who can maybe help with the the nurse helping with the medication management, or he's fallen a few times at home, getting PT involved related to that. So that part of it is actually pretty intuitive, for us because we've done it so long. And as a coach, I know I'm not going into that. So then I try to find the resources around the person and then just teaching the family caregiver what is available, because people don't know. People don't know, oh, this is really an outpatient, or what about mobile part B, or what about, and based on our occupational therapy background, because we know the medical system, we're able to say, okay, this is the best utilization of your specific resources. So I hope that kind of made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're right on point there where it's intuitive at this point, right? Where you're like, hey, you need a skilled therapist in the house to help you with this. There have been multiple moments where, I've been asked something and I'll say, you need to get home health involved. Like you need to go to your doctor, get a prescription for home health and get that set up so that you can get the skilled support that is necessary, right? And I love the example of the brain tumor. It's a lot of times it's getting the diagnosis is the hardest part, right? There's these very long wait lists. It's a nuanced process. It's a stepwise process, right? First you have to do this, then you have to see this specialist, then they have to order this imaging, then they have to read that, then you have to go to this different provider to get the interpretation for it. And then this doctor will give you the final diagnosis and figure out the medications for it. Oh, but you need to follow up with the primary care for your regular refills and stuff, right? And it's a constant process. And oftentimes it takes a lot to even get to that. And without a diagnosis, there's a lot of skilled professionals who can't intervene, right? So a lot of times there's gaps in that care or gaps in that access to professional help because there's no formal diagnosis. And I think it's really important in that capacity where like if someone's coming to you and saying, hey, I'm having all these issues, I'm seeing all these things, what do you suggest I do? I think that's where it really gets into that, hey, it's resource navigation, right? But also medical navigation of like, you need this testing, you need this referral. And we learned that in school, right? Referrals. And so I think that's a great example.
And it's very interesting because even though we have the knowledge and the background and I'm telling her exactly what to do, how many barriers she still is running into, even though she now, like before, she wouldn't even know what to ask for. Now she at least knows what to ask for, but is still unable to actually access it. Health navigation in the United States is extremely complicated. And it's not getting any easier, but that kind of lets me circle back to the whole Colby Index part of it from a caregiver perspective, because for me with mine, one of my biggest frustrations is that it works on like a continuum from 0 to 10, and 0 isn't worse than 10, 10 isn't better than 0. It's just a continuum. And I have, for the one which is called follow through, I'm not the person who needs the checklist and needs all the steps delineated out. I'm more towards the other end of the continuum where I fly by the seat of my pants and I can be extremely flexible and so on. The thing that frustrates me in the healthcare as a caregiver is all these things that I have to do that's so systematized. For example, my mom takes one scheduled medication that you can only get on day 31, the first day, right? It's a 30-day prescription. I can get it on that first day. And having to navigate that every single friggin' month to call the provider and get that prescription makes me go counterintuitive to my normal way of doing things. And so that's where my frustration then comes in. Whereas my ability to think on my feet and problem solve really comes in other parts of it, which makes, it really working towards my strength. My mom recently had an exacerbation of her CHF. And because of my background and so on, I was able to quickly help figure out and come up with all of the solutions to try to keep her out of the hospital. So the whole healthcare navigation is hard, but it is very much set up for certain types of intuitive strengths as opposed to other types of intuitive strengths. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we both just touched upon is more of that early detection, early intervention to really prevent something catastrophic from happening, right?
Oh, for sure.
So, kind of honing in more on that, can you discuss the impact of early detection, early intervention through coaching on the progression of dementia specifically? I think there's no rhyme or rhythm to when someone progresses through the stages of dementia, right? It's different for every single individual. It happens at different times, but being able to pick apart some of those skilled pieces of it, right? Where we're like, oh, this is starting to show signs of the next stage. We should get ready for the progression to the next stage, and kind of detecting that early and intervening earlier with those family caregivers rather than already entering into that next stage and then trying to problem solve or crisis solve.
Crisis manage, right?
Right.
That makes better sense because I do believe that you can prevent some of the progression of dementia, but that is a whole totally different topic, right?
Yeah.
But related to the dementia coaching and people navigating it as a caregiver, I can use two of my clients that are in my group. I started working with the one more than a year ago, and in the process of working with her and coaching her through some things, some of the early signs that I had were mom's not eating. We're struggling to get mom to eat and drink, right? And so we're doing all of the strategies to try to facilitate her being able to increase her intake and be able to eat more. But the entire time all of that is happening, I have it in the back of my head. We're going to have to start to talk about hospice pretty soon, right? So because we bring that skill to the table of just being able to recognize where in her journey mom is, I was able to start to then work on preparing her in the background that we're pretty close to hospice. And so when we got to, some strategies, things like beyond and beyond just, how to eat and trying to increase her intake, I had her start weighing her every week because, she's not going to the doctor, they're at home. And by just adding that strategy of having her weigh her mom every week, it was able to show her and start to prepare her mom's losing weight, right? And her mom's losing weight, which then started to open up the conversations about quality of life versus quantity of life, right? What are we striving for? Are we trying to keep mom at home? All of these questions were then starting to come out. And then as I started, when there was a big step with the weight loss, I had already been working on preparing her that it is time for hospice. And so then that transition to hospice was a lot more seamless as opposed to the other situation. I go in as an occupational therapist working in home health. Wonderful family, moved in with the daughter because, lots of things going on. Dad couldn't take care of mom anymore by himself. As I start working with them, she was still actually doing pretty well. But then every week I'd come, I saw a decline, right? And like 3 weeks later, I'm like, ooh, and this is fast now. And so I'm like, okay, social work, do all the skilled stuff. And we were able to make it a fairly seamless transition. But the reality was that they had had no preparation that she was so close already, to the end of life. And her hospice journey was pretty fast because, nobody along that whole continuum, including the physicians, including the hospital and, everything, nobody had identified that she was already very, very close to that end of her life. So my client has been able to benefit from 6 months of hospice that has truly, truly radically changed their life because they really needed that support, which hospice can then give. as opposed to, waiting so long and nobody's having these conversations and identifying them earlier. So to go back to the question, it really is a good way for people to be able to, you and I know, right? When we're talking to people, we can pick up on things that they don't even know that they're saying. They give us an idea of where this particular person is. And so we're actually very accurate at being able to stage somebody very quickly, even without ever seeing them. And so being able to bring that skill to the table really has meant that the clients that you work with are better prepared for that part of the journey. Or, mom's in independent living. When does she need to go to assisted living? When does she need to go to memory care? The conversation is, well, we don't want her to go to assisted living. We want to keep her in independent living and then just memory care. Okay, then what do we need to put in place? Right? So those are the kinds of conversations and things that we can offer as a coach that you cannot offer as a therapist.
Yeah.
Plus, it's longitudinal over time. You yourself know skilled therapy, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, if you're lucky, 8.
Yeah, it's short term and it's really difficult to get recertifications or renewal of your prescription. Yeah, lots of limitations with that. Lizette, I still have like a laundry list of questions because there's so much we can talk about. But for the sake of time, we've had a pretty holistic conversation around dementia coaching and who could benefit and what types of clients would benefit from it. What is one takeaway you'd like the audience to consider as it relates to dementia and family caregiving and coaching?
Do not be the family caregiver who puts your head in the sand and says there's nothing wrong. Those caregivers that's a whole nother topic, right? Just caregiver readiness. But the reality is, if somebody has dementia, these changes are going to come. Unless they pass away before they get to it, these changes are going to come. So probably the biggest takeaway is don't ignore it. It's not going to go away. If there truly is something wrong, finding out sooner rather than later will significantly put you in a position of power as opposed to a position of frantically just trying to figure it out later on. And being proactive about the fact that if the person you care for who is living with dementia lives long enough, they will need 24-hour care. End of discussion. No ifs, ands, or buts. If they live long enough with this process, they will need 24-hour care. How are you going to fix that when you get there? And starting to think through planning like you and I do, right? Being proactive about pre-planning. And I'm not saying, December 31st, 2024, we're going to do this, but having it in your mind, what are your options, and actually starting to plan ahead for those things. If the person's still driving, recognizing that you're going to have to take the keys away at some point or another, because you have to, it's not safe, right? Wherever in the journey the person is, whatever the situation is that they don't want to deal with, they've got to really recognize and learn to know that these things are going to happen whether you want them to happen or not, whether you're ready for them to happen or not. It's going to happen if they live long enough. So being proactive will significantly decrease your stress as a caregiver. Put support around you early and often. Don't wait for respite. People wait too long and then they burn out and then it's too late. So those are my top takeaways.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lizette, for this wonderful conversation around coaching versus skill therapy for dementia and really highlighting why dementia coaching could be so important and imperative for family caregivers.
Well, thank you for having me here. It was lovely.
Absolutely. To my listeners, thank you for tuning into the Season 2 finale episode with Lizette Cloete. If you would like to learn more about Lizette or Think Different Dementia, please visit thinkdifferentdementia.com. Sharing expert perspectives on various age-related topics and services can help the community learn how to plan for a healthier future. At Aging Together, we are dedicated to helping you navigate aging together. As promised, here's what you can look forward to for Season 3. For those of you who have supported the show since day one, you've gone through this journey with me, and for that, I'm grateful. I started with a weekly audio-only podcast with mostly 10 to 20-minute snippets of me talking, with intermittent interviews with professionals. In Season 2, we evolved into a monthly 60-minute interview with a professional, which now included video. How cool! As you can imagine, Season 3 won't come without further evolution. Due to the growing audience and interested guest speakers, Season 3 will include 2 verticals. We will continue to launch a 60-minute interview with a professional on the 15th of each month, a replica of Season 2, as the Professionals Insights vertical. New to Season 3, we are launching a Caregiver Stories vertical, where caregivers will share their lived experiences and journeys through various stages and aspects of caregiving. This 10-part series will go live on the 1st of each month, and I'm honored to hear and share these vulnerable stories. I'm excited to hear from you, the audience, as you likely resonate with some of them. We have an excellent lineup of guests for both verticals heading into 2025, and I'm sure you'll agree. As a reminder, our seasons run February through November. Stay tuned for our very first caregiver story on February 1st, 2025. Until then, I wish you and your community a joyous and healthy holiday season. See you next year.